The tragic duality of Arthur Fleck, a linear explainer. We're going to take a continuous linear journey today, tracking Arthur's evolution from a subdued patient locked away in a grim institution all the way to his absolute tragic demise. It's this incredibly dense psychological story full of fractured identity, manipulation, and the devastating collision between theatrical fantasy and harsh reality.
There is no Joker. It's just me. To really understand how Arthur arrives at the shattering climax of self-realization, we have to trace his story chronologically. We need to start at the absolute bottom, right in the bleak, abusive halls of Arkham Asylum, way before the makeup ever goes back on.
The status quo, life inside Arkham. We begin with Arthur enduring this heavily medicated, completely miserable existence. I mean, he's routinely degraded by guards who literally force him to clean up messes and demand he tell them jokes just to get a cigarette. The constant soundtrack to his torment, a guard whistling when the Saints go marching in. At this point, Arthur is just a shell of a man, entirely stripped of his agency, merely surviving from one humiliating day to the next.
The defense lawyer's strategy. Meanwhile, on the outside, there's a crucial legal defense being formulated. His attorney, Marianne Stewart, she's attempting to build a case that Arthur's severe childhood abuse created a fragmentation, a split personality. She wants to argue that this alternate identity, the Joker, is solely responsible for the crimes he committed. Her ultimate goal here isn't just to win a trial. She wants to secure his placement in an actual hospital with real doctors, rather than the brutal E ward of the Department of Corrections.
The catalyst, finding Lee in B ward. But, this monotonous reality is completely upended when a guard actually allows him into a musical therapy class in B ward, and it's here that he locks eyes with a woman named Lee. In a place utterly devoid of joy, their shared connection over music and these dark fantasies, it instantly reignites a highly dangerous spark within Arthur.
Let's look at Lee's manipulative lies versus the truth, because this is the very foundation of their toxic romance. Lee intentionally manipulates Arthur by fabricating this tragic backstory to perfectly mirror his own. She claims to have grown up in his poor neighborhood with an abusive father who died in a car crash and says she was involuntarily committed, but the reality? It is starkly different. She actually grew up rich on the Upper West Side, has a living doctor father, voluntarily committed herself just to get close to the infamous Joker, and get this, she even went to grad school for psychiatry. She isn't a fellow victim at all. She is a fan completely obsessed with his monstrous persona.
I want to see the real you. You need to stop taking your medication. Bonding over these shared delusions and even imagining a life together, Lee starts isolating Arthur from his legal counsel. She essentially coerces him into abandoning his medication, pushing him hard to bring the Joker persona back to the surface. By telling him she wants to see the real him, she manipulates his deep-seated need for love and acceptance just to resurrect the killer clown.
The pre-trial escalation. This manipulation leads directly into a massive media frenzy and a rapid escalation before the trial even starts. So, 1 month out, Arthur gives a sensationalized TV interview to Patty Myers, where they clash over who he really is. Then, on day 1 of the trial, Dr. Liu testifies that Arthur is perfectly sane and faking his illness. Day 2, his former neighbor Sophie Dumont testifies about his deep delusions. By day 3, Arthur actually confronts Lee about her lies, but she successfully ropes him right back in by claiming she is pregnant. The testimony from experts and neighbors is systematically dismantling the defense's entire split personality narrative.
Let's dive into Dr. Liu's psychological evaluation, because this is absolutely crucial. As the prosecution's star witness, Dr. Liu delivers a major blow to the defense. He explicitly states that Arthur is deeply disturbed, sure, but fully sane. He testifies that Arthur was sane at the time of the crimes and is consciously faking a mental illness, putting on a performance for attention. Dr. Liu basically paints a picture of a man experiencing long-standing sadness, displaying narcissistic self-centeredness, and showing complete indifference to the feelings of others. He knows exactly what he is doing.
Arthur takes over the courtroom. Hearing himself described as weak and ordinary by both sides, that pushes Arthur right over the edge. Rejecting his lawyer's warnings about Lee's deceit and totally intoxicated by the crowds of supporters cheering his name outside, Arthur takes drastic action. First, he argues with his attorney about her strategy. Next, he abruptly fires her in open court, even giving her a kiss goodbye. The judge reluctantly allows him to represent himself. And finally, the next day, Arthur returns to court wearing full Joker clown makeup in a bright red suit. He has absolutely fully embraced the chaos.
But this raises a vital question. What happens when the Joker fantasy actually collides with the reality of his victims?
Arthur turns the trial into his own personal stand-up routine, just reveling in the spotlight. But the courtroom theatrics come to a sudden, devastating halt when the prosecution calls Gary Puddles to the stand, his former coworker who was actually in the room when Arthur brutally murdered Randall.
I'm scared right now, here, with you in front of me. Arthur attempts to cross-examine Gary with his usual dramatic flair, really leaning into that Joker persona. But Gary doesn't play along. Instead, Gary tearfully explains how the murder ruined his life, how he can't sleep, and how he is absolutely terrified of Arthur in that very moment. Gary's genuine, undeniable terror completely shatters Arthur's theatrical armor. It literally forces Arthur to realize the profound, real-world pain he caused the only person who was ever truly kind to him.
The mask slips, a brutal return to reality. That psychological crack opens the door to a brutal physical reality. After abruptly resting his defense without calling a single witness, Arthur is escorted back to Arkham. The guards, furious over his televised antics, savagely beat him in the showers. They violently strip away his red suit and mock his delusions. Arthur returns to court the next day physically broken, emotionally exhausted, and, critically, without his clown makeup. Arthur's closing statement confession. What happens next represents an absolute surrender. Stripped of all theatricality, Arthur delivers a heart-wrenching closing statement. He drops the Joker persona entirely, looking at the jury, at Lee, at the cameras, and publicly kills the character. He admits that the Joker was all just a fantasy, taking full responsibility for his actions. In a shocking twist, he confesses to the previously unknown murder of his own mother. He just breaks down, pleading to blow everything up and start a new life as himself. The confession obviously seals his legal fate. The jury swiftly returns from deliberation in less than an hour. The verdicts: Count 1, Murray Franklin, guilty of first-degree murder. Count 2, Randall Kleimenhofer, guilty of second-degree murder. The grim reality of his actions has finally, inescapably, caught up to him.
The climax? The courthouse bombing. But before the final count can even be read, the world literally explodes. A massive car bomb detonates right outside the courthouse, blowing the wall of the courtroom completely apart. The trial is plunged into utter chaos. Amidst all the screaming and the rubble, a dazed and bleeding Arthur actually manages to escape into the panicked streets of Gotham.
The final encounter on the stairs. Fleeing the wreckage, Arthur reunites with Lee on those iconic neighborhood stairs. But as we see, they are entirely at odds. Arthur is vulnerable. He just wants to escape the madness and is begging to build a quiet life together. But Lee? She is cold, manipulative, and completely checked out. She isn't interested in Arthur, the broken man. She is solely interested in the violent, chaotic fantasy of the Joker.
All we had was the fantasy, and you gave up. In a moment of devastating cruelty, Lee turns her back on him. She delivers the fatal blow to Arthur's hopes with those exact words. She abandons him right there on the stairs, revealing once and for all that she never loved the man standing in front of her, only the terrifying monster he pretended to be on television.
The tragic final act in Arkham. With his legal fate sealed and his one source of perceived love gone, Arthur's captured and returned to the bleak halls of Arkham Asylum. He has no fantasy left to hide behind. As he walks down the corridor, another inmate approaches him. The inmate tells him this dark, rambling joke about a psychopath at a bar, and right as the punchline lands, the inmate violently and fatally stabs Arthur.
Arthur is left bleeding out on the floor, while in the background, his killer laughs and cuts a smile into his own face. It leaves us with a haunting final thought to end this explainer. Was Arthur Fleck's tragic fate always determined by a society that only ever valued him as a spectacle, punishing him the exact moment he finally chose reality over the fantasy?